Welcome, everybody. Welcome to this month's webinar with TTRA's partner, Arrivalist. We are thrilled to have you all here today for this visualization masterclass aimed at helping you take your presentations to the next level. During this session, Arrivalist founder and CEO, Cree Lawson, along with Jeff, Justin, and Balakumar, will show you how to transform your data into captivating visualizations and communicate clearly and effectively. Cree is a serial entrepreneur with over 20 years of experience in travel, media, and analytics. He travels around the country presenting Arrivalist's unique insights into the way media influences tourism to the 130 plus cities, states, and countries that Arrivalist counts as clients. Welcome. Cree, feel free to take it away.
All right, thank you. Look, first of all, thank you to TTRA for giving us this opportunity to share what we've been working on for many years. And so we've been focused on visualization, though you might not have known it, for the past 3 to 4 years. And I'd like to just give a preamble to all the work that we've done. Then I'll hand it over to my esteemed colleagues for really the genius behind our, or at least the genius behind our approach to visualization, a genius that I give them credit for and take less of myself. So if you ping me if you can't see my screen, but this is our visualization masterclass sponsored by Horizon. And Horizon is, in case you haven't seen it yet, Horizon is the next iteration of Arrivalist reporting platform. So for today's presentation, we will feature first Bala, our head of analytics. Bala's been with the company 8 years now and has ingested more books on visualization than anybody I personally know. He's also an avid soccer fan and one of the best practitioners of Brazilian mixed martial arts in Canada. May not know that. After that, Jeff Summerson is our head of product. Jeff is from Seattle and has more than 20 years in product development experience. He is really good at trivia, but not nearly as good as Justin Invericht, who is our full stack engineer, and Justin is our reigning trivia champion at Arrivalist. So we're going to have a little bit of trivia in this presentation just to spice it up a little bit. But first, we'll cover the topics we're going to cover today. How important is visualization? I'll give you my perspective on that. And obviously, this is a self-selecting audience, so obviously you care about visualization as well. But I'd like to give you my take on just how important it is and what we've learned over the last few years. Secondly, how do charts tell stories? I think it's a quick deep dive into storytelling with charts, but it's one that I've been distilling over the past 11 years, and I hope you'll find some value in it. We'll talk about, Bala's going to talk about visualization best practices. These are things you can use in your day-to-day activities at work and as you create charts for your data. Jeff's going to talk about putting those concepts into action. And as we all know, putting product into action is nothing without putting action into code. So Justin's going to talk about turning our products into code. So we're going from concept to execution today. But first, a challenge. So open up the chat section of or the Q&A section, and the first who enters the answer to this question wins. So this is just a little challenge, something I've wondered for a long time. Lots of things have inventors. The light bulb has an inventor, the typewriter has an inventor, all these things have an inventor, but who is credited with inventing the first chart? Was it no one particular person? It just kind of evolved out of data. Was it William Playfair? Was it Thomas Edison with over 10,000 patents? Was it Joseph Priestley, or was it the Massachusetts Institute of Technology? So just type your answer in to the chat. Who's got an answer or the Q&A? I've got one answer for E. Oh, all right. Now we're populating. MIT. No one in particular. William Playfair, the correct answer. And I know some Hey, Descartes, nice. Fascinating. Getting some good write-in answers. I would expect no less from a group of researchers. That's awesome. So might be disputed. Some would say William Playfair, but if you go chronologically, the answer is Joseph Priestley. This is what many regard to be the first chart. Joseph Priestley in the late 1700s created this chart of all the great thinkers, when they lived and what they contributed to the world of thought. And this is often credited with being the first chart ever published. To be fair, William Playfair took it to a whole nother level, but this is widely regarded to be the first chart. And the one point I want to make from this chart is that the original chart told a story. In fact, the very first charts tell great stories. And how does that happen? How could you say a chart, data plotted on a screen, tells a story? What's the real essential tension here is how do computers or data-driven entities communicate with people? And how do we best translate data into stories? So the best, I'm fond of saying that stories are the fabric of human memory. And stories, in order to be remembered, have to have, well, what is a story anyway? I would posit that a story has three characteristics. It's three things, very simply. I was an English major briefly. I'm not an authority on the subject, but in my time as an English major, I realized that stories have characters. Now, a character in your story could be any number of things. A character could be an origin market. A character could be hotel tax revenue. A character could be consumer sentiment. Characters are usually known before they're charted, but a story is characters in conflict over time. Pretty simple. Two characters in conflict over time. So how would we chart characters in conflict over time? Well, let's start with one of our first charts at Arrivalist. Now, I'm not going to tell you this is a great chart. In fact, when we first launched Daily Travel Index, I showed a chart like this to my 9-year-old son, and he said, "Dad," I said, "what do you think?" I was so proud. And he said, "Dad, it looks like a bunch of scrabble." Later, I overheard him telling a friend, a friend said, "What does your dad do?" And he said, "Oh, my dad sells pictures of Scrabble." And at that point, I realized I really needed to upgrade our visualization. But this is one of the first charts we ever built at Arrivalist. And what you'll notice here that there are two characters. Two characters are ad exposures, which are something our clients control, and visitors, which is something our clients would like to control but don't. So there's an essential tension between the ad exposures and the characters. Of course, these characters are in conflict over time. And so if you watch the little scrabble, the wavy line, you'll notice that there's a big burst of ad exposures and an ensuing burst in arrivals, and a burst in ad exposures and an ensuing burst in arrivals. And then at the end of the period, the ad exposures go flat. Why is that? Now, this is the city of New Orleans. They market during the summer months, and they market this summer, they market that summer, they market that summer. We were able to show that they had, as they increased in exposures, they increased arrivals, and they were able to win more budget. They were able to flatten the curve of impressions because now they were marketing perennially. They were marketing year round. So we helped them make the case they should market year round. And that's how these characters conflicted over time. And this is the resolution of that story. So this is just one chart. I'm sure we'll have a lot more, but this is one chart that exemplifies how characters change over time. Now at Arrivalist, we spent the last 3 to 4 years focusing on data and just doubling down on data. And I think it's a good thing that we did. We built 48 or more charts in our reporting platform. And 3 years ago, we embarked on a journey to rebuild visualization. We learned a lot from that process. So what I'd like to share with you is what we'd like to share with you today is what we learned from that process. And a last personal thing on mine, I'm a firm believer that visualization is to data what bottles are to perfume. When you take away the bottle, what are you left with? You're left with a bunch of formless, smelly water. But if you put it in the right bottle, a perfume can be something kind of life-changing. So that's my last pontification on data. And now I want to celebrate the people who helped us build a Horizon, 3 of whom we're featuring here today. And so so it's with much appreciation for these people that I hand it over to Paula, who's going to talk about data storytelling and give some examples, and then we'll talk about how we put data storytelling to work in building Horizon. So over to you, Bella.
Thank you, Green. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. Hi, everyone. So when Chris said, we had to put together kind of like the principles of data storytelling, I honestly didn't know that if I can cover it in 1 hour, much less in 20 minutes, but I'm going to try. What I wanted to show today is kind of adding to what Chris said, why stories matter. And we're going to talk about some principal concepts that we are using as we're thinking about our presentations, our visualizations, our Horizon platform. The concepts that I'm going to show you today are basics, like so 101. On top of that, we are learning a lot. like Chris said, I'm reading through a bunch of books. I'm going to share some of the books that I'm reading so that you guys can read those as well. And just trying to learn more and more on how we can make our presentations, our insights, so much more clear that clients take actions right away. I used to be the one that used to create 50 slide decks and used to be proud of it. I used to go into a meeting and talk for 1 hour and say, hey, here's what the data told us, right? And at the end of the day, I realized that not many clients were taking actions from the data because it took a while for them to understand what those 50 slides meant, right? So I started kind of paring my slides down to 3 to 5 and really having more conversations on how we can use 1 insight or 2 insights and take clear action from the data. So I'm going to share some examples from our clients. Some are example data. Everything that I've used here is not real. But I do want to share examples of visualizations that have had a positive impact on our clients. So we're going to talk about knowing your audience. This is very, very important. And I'm going to talk a little bit about choosing the right visual. And we're going to kind of go on a journey together. We're going to look at a chart. We're going to look at a problem, and we're going to solve it in sequential steps and seeing what we ended up with, right? And finally, I have a surprise in the end that's called Bing Bang Bongo. I'm a firm believer of Bing Bang Bongo. I'll explain what it is towards the end. But it's a concept that we all know, we all cherish, but we don't often use it in our presentations. And this has made a huge impact on how the stories or how the insights kind of resonate in our client's mind after the meeting, right? First, why stories matter, right? So we all know the stories. We all know the Rapunzel, Aladdin, the Alice in Wonderland. There is something magical about a story, right? And apart from the characters and conflict over time, they grab your attention, right? Stories kind of evoke an emotional response, right? You feel for the characters, you want the good guys to win, you want the bad guys to lose, right? So there is an emotional response that is involved. They also kind of make things a little bit more memorable, right? So you remember more about the stories rather than, hey, my campaign was 0.65% more effective than my other campaign, right? You're not going to remember the numbers as much. And finally, it makes it easier to repeat, right? So as we were looking at things, right, at the end of the meeting, we want our clients to go in and repeat at least 1 or 2 things to someone who wasn't in a meeting and in a crisp and clear to understand manner, right? So we wanted to kind of change how we do presentations into good storytelling. So the purpose of today and what I'll cover mostly is how we can perhaps use different visualizations to convey a meaningful story. And like I said, hopefully we reduce the 50-page reports to 3 to 5. It's not going to happen immediately. In fact, it went from 50 to 30 for me, then 30 to 10, and 10 to maybe 5 now. It's a gradual change, right? But the changes that we're going to make are going to have a meaningful impact on the actions that we want our clients to take. So this is something that I kind of look at, anybody can excel, I've seen a lot of people pull really good insights, and I've only seen very few people do really good presentations that are memorable, right? You can build those lasting stories, right? So that's what we want to be. We're probably somewhere in the middle right now. So we want to be in a position where we're creating lasting stories, right? Here are some of the books. I'm just putting it right out there. If there are people that want to read it or screenshot it, I've read the first 2 in here. The next 2 is on my reading list. I also follow these authors on LinkedIn, where they share some of the excerpts from their book, which I found valuable. I sometimes repurpose their visualization, right? And I strongly believe imitation is the sincerest form of flattery here. But do give it a thought. Storytelling with data is kind of how my journey started. Now it's kind of evolving more into what are the other things that I can learn. So let's start with the core concept of knowing your audience, right? So before we start a presentation or a report, right, can we answer the basic question? Who's your audience, right? Is it a data analyst, media agency, or a marketing manager? No, believe it or not, each person is going to want to see data differently. It's a combination, right? Understanding this will kind of help you understand their emotional need. So, write it down. Who's going to be in this meeting, right? And what do you need them to do? Do you want them to take an action? Do you want to have a conversation? The one thing I always tell myself is, and it's important, is when you're presenting, you are the subject matter expert, right? Which means that you're in a very, very unique position to interpret the insights in a way that can help them understand, perhaps, like Chris said, 40 different reports. And you can condense that to 5 slides, 5 insights that they can understand. That's on you, right? So you hold a huge responsibility. And finally, how you communicate does have an impact in person or a phone call. I tend to put more text when it comes to phone calls because people or Zoom meetings, because people tend to forget what I said. Hey, let me see what he's writing on the slide. Whereas in person, I can be more visual, right? I can talk about it. I can have more conversation. I can see the reactions of someone who's understanding the slide or is not, right? So those are the small minor changes that I make depending on how I communicate, right? So let's take a real world example. There was a tourism organization, a DMO, that came to us and said, hey, I've been doing this for the last 10 years. I'm trying to convince my stakeholders to do more out-of-state marketing, right? And I've shown data before. I've shown it from surveys. I've shown data from Google Analytics, but the stakeholders aren't convinced. So they signed up with Arrivalist to prove, one, their assumption is valid. And she said, I want to have a simple to understand visualizations. I don't understand these complicated reports, right? So I said, okay, can you give me 10 minutes with you before I put anything on the paper, right? I said, absolutely. Help me understand these stakeholders. Who are they? And she said, well, 8 out of 10 are hotel owners, okay? And as we were talking, we got to realize that hotel tax revenue represented a majority of their revenue, right? And why are they not taking actions? Is because, or they're not saying convinced yet, is because they're seeing more Floridians in the destination. And said, okay. And in the past, we have presented a lot of data and they're not so much into the data. Okay. So we took this particular challenge and we said, okay, we're going to make you this one slide. I'd like you to present this one slide with all the caveats, all the context that you can provide before and after, and tell me how it worked out. So what we did was we looked at people who stayed overnight in the destination and compared them to people who stayed overnight in a hotel, right? And the reason we did that is we know that hotel, again, evokes that emotional response in those stakeholders, right? 8 out of 10 are hotel owners. And what we're going to look at is simply the top 10 markets changing ranks. We're not going to even go into share. We're not talking about percentages. We're not talking about any numbers. We're simply looking at, is this your top market for someone who's staying in the destination? Is this the same top market for someone who's coming to the destination and staying in a hotel? And we started kind of going through these different Florida DMAs, and we started seeing that some of them were dropping share. And the first impact here was that New York was number 2 in terms of people coming in and staying in a hotel. And then as we traversed through this, we started seeing more and more of these green lines of out-of-state markets popping up, like Atlanta. We started seeing DC coming up. We started seeing Chicago coming up in top 10. And we said, look at the top 12 markets. Top 6 have shifted in ranks in terms of, who's staying in a destination versus hotels. Of course, you're seeing more people coming in from Florida in the destination, but if you're looking purely at people staying in a hotel, there's ample opportunities for us to go in and target these out-of-state markets. And this resulted in an action. This gave our client the ammunition to go to a board meeting and present this and take action, right? So that's kind of like what we're going to talk about throughout is how can we make the insights much more meaningful, evoke an emotional response, make it easier for people to go in and repeat that. In fact, the 6 out of 12 was something that was repeatable even after the meeting. And I always say this a little bit, humanize the data, actions will follow, right? People love a David and Goliath battle, right? So people want to compare themselves to their competitors. They want to compare against past performance. And your client is the hero of your story, right? How are they winning amidst all the adversities that they have? And we kind of use dull colors for the villains throughout and bright colors for the heroes. And you'll see that throughout this presentation that I did. Just one more importance on like why knowing your audience is important, right? So I've presented this a lot. I've presented brand lift studies, and I've said, here's your control group arrival rate. And I'm using a PSA ad today because I don't want to share the client's name, but usually this is the client's. You will have clients creative in here, but I'd say here's your control arrival rate, about 0.40%. Here's your target arrival rate for 0.60%. And just a 50% lift, right? And mostly I'd expect oohs and ahs at this time because, hey, our creatives and our marketing is getting more people into the destination, right? And most of the time I used to get like, oh, okay, 50%, is that good? Is that bad, right? And I don't understand how to repeat 0.4 and 0.6 to a stakeholder, right? So that's why I said humanize the data is not everyone will understand the graphs, not everyone will understand the rates, right? So you want to make it a little bit more meaningful. So I started recreating that particular slide into, hey, of someone who's in your control group that didn't see your ads, for every 1,000 people, 4 people arrived. And for someone that did see your ads, 6 people arrived. So your marketing actually was 1.5 times more effective than a control group. All right. You can take numerous inferences from this. Your marketing generated 2 additional incremental revenue arrivals from it, right? But this is something that's easy for people to go and repeat, easy for people to understand. You don't need to understand what those bars mean. You don't need to understand what those axes mean. You don't need to understand what arrival rate means, right? All you need to understand is your marketing had an impact, and this is the impact. So next, we're going to talk about choosing an effective visual. Hopefully, I've already given you some insight into different visuals you're using. I'm going to talk about more and more of how you can take simple visuals and turn them into somewhat of a good storytelling, right? Just adding a little bit of a creative design to it, right? So I'm not going to go through all of this. You have ample number of visual displays available. You have simple text, scatterplot, table, lines, bar graphs, heat. You can have different types of bar graphs, right? Stacked, horizontal, vertical, waterfall, even square area, right? But taking something like text, right? I want to show you one effective way of using visualization. So we took something as a text visual, right? And we added a design layer to it just to show a client how different seasons impacted their visitation share, right? And here's how we did it. As you can see, it's not a big bar graph or anything like that. I could have put a single bar graph. But here what we did was we took a simple text, what is a share and how long are they staying in the destination? And we just did a nice little graphic that represented the different seasons, winter, spring, summer, and fall, for people to kind of take a screenshot or even take this particular slide and put it in their board meeting, right? Because it's easy for people to see and resonate with those imageries. I always also look at different visuals that are just not common, but are available in the marketplace and have made an impact. And this is again, not Arrivalist, but this is from Stephanie Evergreen. She made what is called as a proportion chart. And I love this for a few reasons, right? What you're seeing on the screen is on the left is the share of population by demographic. On the right is share of women-owned businesses by the same demographics. So even though there's 14% African-American population, you can see that jumping up to 42%. And the headline says, women of color launch the vast majority of new business and Black women lead the charge, right? And things to like here is that it focuses on those three major demographics that represents women of color. And honestly, if I were doing this for the first time, I might have put in every single demographic in here, right? But see how she kind of combined all the others into one bucket, because what we want to focus on is these three personas, and all the others can be combined into one, right? So don't be afraid to look at your visualization and say, what is not necessary? What is not adding value to my statement, my insight that I've put right up there, right? And the other thing to note here is the dull colors that are being used for all others, and a little bit of a brighter colors used for the other demographics, again, highlighting the insight that we want the audience to see. Here's another one that we did for marketing. Again, it's a simple, a lollipop chart or slope graph or range plot. There's some different names for it. But what this shows is hotel revenue per arrival versus vacation rental revenue per arrival. And we're simply showing that vacation rental visitors spend more per every visitor that come into the destination, right? Even if I didn't have any numbers in this particular chart, you would still be able to see that range. You would still be able to make the same inferences that I did without having those numbers. And that's what sometimes I aim to do is, can I tell the same story without the numbers, right? So the third concept that we're going, so we went into two concepts. One is knowing your audience. Another one is choosing the right visual. And I've shown you some snippets of it. We're going to do a lot more of those different visuals throughout the next 10 minutes that I have. But the one thing I try to do a lot is the clutter, right? What is clutter? Clutter is anything that's taking up a lot of visual space, but don't increase our understanding, right? So anything where if it's there, you get an ugh moment, right? Anything that makes the chart look a little bit more complicated than it needs to be, right? And I always talk about this cognitive load, which is like, picture this blank screen, right? Anything that I add in here, your brain is going to immediately look at this, right? And say, oh, what is that? I'm going to read through that, right? So imagine, and again, this is all examples, but imagine you're presenting revenue increases year over year, right? And you have this, again, from a charting standpoint, you've done excellent, right? You have the labels, you have the axis, you have the legend, you have the colors, you have the variety, right? But the numbers in here they're almost 10, 15 numbers to look at. Someone looking at that is not going to be able to understand what is 9, 8, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, and is that 10, 2, 6, 5, right? I'm reading through those numbers and I'm missing the story. And the story here and the insight here is our revenue increased. The story insight is very, very simple. The same chart, same result can be achieved by doing something like this. We can even make it much more clear on this, but this is a very simple example of me telling you 9.8, 10.3. That's the same inferences that you're driving from the left-hand side, right? Our revenue increased. In fact, I can even remove the data labels and put year over year. So think about how you can remove elements that does not add any value. So we are going to go through an hypothetical scenario with Universal Orlando, somewhat realish, because we're going to take some real events as well. But this was pre-pandemic. Theme parks in 2019 were facing a challenging summer. So, we had all these articles coming in of whether theme parks market share will go down. And at that time, Universal actually announced a new Hagrid ride that was going live on June 30, right? And a client came to us and said, okay, I want to see, let's say you have your client is Universal Studios Orlando, and they came to you and said, hey, is the theme park market share really decreasing? Are we actually, starting this at the wrong time, right? And you went in and you pulled all the data and you said, oh, is there a drop in theme park visitors this summer? Let us look at Magic Kingdom's market share on the left. Let's look at Universal Studios market share on the right. Hey, look, Hagrid ride actually launched and it increased, right? From an insight standpoint, the numbers are correct. From a visual storytelling standpoint, I think there's a lot more we can do to make this a little bit more clear, right? For example, we can think about, do we need 2 different charts? And this is how you kind of start to declutter, right? So do we need those 2 different charts? Do we need an axis label? What does these axis mean, right? What do these colors represent? Why are there 2 different colors, right? What did Hagrid ride do? Yes, we said Hagrid ride launched, but what did it do? And is this the right title, right? So we're going to take a little bit of a step-by-step approach to kind of declutter this. So let's do step 1. We're going to combine both of them into one chart, and we're just going to shade Orlando's market share. Magic Kingdom is blue, Universal's green. Now we're going to remove those data markers that we had in there. So all those big circles. So we remove that. Then we're going to remove grid lines. And I'm a strong believer that sometimes we don't need the grid lines. Very rarely we need grid lines, right? We're going to keep things a little bit more clear, right? So now we're going to add up the axis labels on the left. So you can see proportion of Orlando visitors, arrival month. And now we're going to add a little bit of a chart description, right? And chart title. Hey, this is what this particular chart shows. And now we're going to clean up the data labels. And now when I say clean up the data labels, look at all these different data labels that we have in here. How many numbers do they have to look at before they get to this 15 magical number that we want them to look to, right? So we're going to really focus in on the last 3 months. This is the challenging summer month, right? These are not the challenging summer months. So we're only going to go look at these 3. Now, immediately, the one thing that happens throughout this chart is when you remove all of this, your first attention goes to the first number here, not here, but here, right? Now we're going to add a little bit of a thing that you can do is you don't need to have legends all the time. You can actually add the legends as a data label, or you can label it directly. So this is Magic Kingdom, and you can see that I'm using a dull color for Magic Kingdom because Universal Studios is our account, right? Now we're keeping Universal Studios in green. And finally, we're going to add our own narrative to it, which says, hey, look at this new Hagrid ride cluster that actually launched in June that caused an increase in Universal's market share while we're seeing a decrease in Magic Kingdom, right? So imagine how we started. We started with this and we ended with this, right? And that's what we want to do with decluttering is try to think about how can we make this most positive as well as how can we get to the insights faster. So I've kind of reviewed everything here, and I have 5 minutes, so I'm going to go a little bit quicker, and I'm going to talk a little bit about colors and animations, right? So colors are your best friend to tell your story powerful, right? It's a powerful tool that you can use to tell and draw your audience's attention, right? Everything stands out against gray, so I usually use gray for contrast. And I also try and keep in mind that there are people that are colorblind. Even I'm colorblind, partially colorblind. So I try to keep things a little bit varied in terms of colors. I don't use, blue and darker blue or certain things like that, right? And also be careful of the tone that the color represents. If you're in Canada like me, red is positive. Red is your is our Canadian flag, and it's red everywhere here. But red also signifies a decrease in the US, right? So for certain negative numbers, right? So think about your audience and what color means to them, right? So here's an example of a museum client that we did who increased their closing hours on Thursdays. So you can see this is the Art Institute of Chicago. They actually, instead of closing at 6 p.m., they closed at 8:30 now. And they wanted to see if that made an impact in terms of stealing share away from other museums. And if I put color on every single day of the week, the story is kind of submerged in there somewhere, right? So what we did was we simply said, okay, by increasing the closing hours on Thursday, Art Institute was able to steal more share from other museums and attractions. And what we did was we made everything else gray, and we simply pointed out the Thursday. And now you can clearly see that Art Institute was number one in terms of share on Thursdays. And that's what we mean by using colors appropriately, right? Similar to colors, you can also use animations to tell the story appropriately. And this is one story we told at a conference recently. We had two characters, a hotel and a vacation rental, right? You can see the blue is vacation rental, green is hotel. And I want to tell this without putting any numbers on that particular stacked bar chart, right? So we said, hey, vacation rental revenue represented less than 40% of Austin's overnight lodging revenue in 2019. And as we traversed through the pandemic, we saw that increased to 75%. And now we were looking to understand at what point do we reach the same stability. And in Q1 2021, we saw the first time ever that the hotel was on par with vacation rental revenue. And finally, when we got to Q4 of 2021, is the first time we saw that the hotel's share of overnight revenue was consistent with what we saw before pandemic. Just like colors can hurt, if you had crazy animations like this, and believe me, I've kind of played around with this a lot, and I've always thought the more you animate, the better. These can also hurt your narrative, right? People are just always looking around, right? And finally, I promised you what's Bing Bang Bongo. One of the core concepts that I use throughout these presentations as well is it's a very simple concept of repeating the same insight again and again in a presentation. So it's kind of like the concept is you start with the Bing Bang Bongo. When you're talking about the bang, you're still talking about the bing, bang, bing, bang, bing, bongo. And then you have the bang, you have the bongo, and conclusion is also telling you the same thing. Think about how the stories have affected our livelihood, right? We hear the stories again and again and again and again and again. And now we know the stories by heart. We've seen, we can tell what's going to happen to those characters. We know what's the turning point. And sometimes it might feel like you are doing redundant slides or redundant insights. It's redundant for you because you're going through the same presentation again and again. It's a reminder for your client every single time they see it. So, hey, we saw that arrival lift was 50% on the first slide. Here we see that arrival lift again was 50%. Hey, in the end, remember our arrival lift for 50%. So the more they hear this particular insight throughout the presentation, more likely they're going to remember after the meeting. What did you learn from the meeting? Oh, arrival lift was 50%. So I think we did pretty good, right? With that, I'm gonna have the summary, right? I have to do, after a bing bang bongo, I can't not do summaries, but know your audience, choose the right visual. We went through a process of decluttering, which is very basic, but I do want you to think about your graphics in that format. Use the colors and animations appropriately. They are a very powerful tool. If you don't know what to do with colors, what I do is I make everything gray and start and say, what insight do I want to tell? And start to pick out those insights and really turn them into bright green, right? And finally, bing bang bongo, because repetition can help you really cement your stories in the client's mind. Thank you so much for your time. Jeff, I'm going to hand it off to you.
Great, thanks, Bala. All right. So, what Bala's touched on is what we endeavor to do with our own products. And we've put thousands of hours over the last couple of years working to understand how we take a business that at one point was had an audience that was very data heavy, meaning data scientists, and just give me the data and I'll slice it myself. That has changed now, and it's more equal with data scientists and equally weighted toward marketers that are trying to make decisions about how to spend money and bring people to their destinations. We still have a lot of data scientists that use our data, but you've got to speak to people in their own language. And so we started with, and this is a subset of things, and Bala already touched on many of these, right? But you know, in speaking to people in the language that they speak, right? You have to present data in different ways, right? So textual summaries, which using natural language is one way, right? Somebody might prefer to read something instead of see it in a graph. A lot of people, and where we've invested heavily as well, is how do you use the concepts that Bala just spoke to create the best graphs and maps and charts and rankings that allow people to not only be told a story, but interpret and understand that story completely and cleanly. And then, there's a hybrid model too, right? You have a platform that is SaaS-like in design, where maybe they don't want to download a big file and cut it themselves. They don't want to look at a chart, but they want to be able to manipulate the data in your platform. So how do they make real-time queries and update those charts by allowing them a certain flexibility in their experience? And how do you allow one insight to extend a story from a previous insight? Right, so we have an interface that has a scrolling design, right? So you see it, metrics at the top and insights and charts and graphs and maps and rankings below, but how does one flow to the next? So that's always a challenge, but that's what we endeavor to do, right? So how do you put it all in one place, right? So you don't have to use separate logins, you don't have to go to separate sites, everything's in one place so that you can mentally stitch these stories together, which is what Bala was touching on earlier as it relates to letting it all make sense and removing the clutter and making it easy to understand. So we've invested really heavily in that narrative. You're going to have to make assumptions about who your audience is. That's just about listening. It's about knowing your customer. It's about being out and talking to them on a recursive basis. But you have to be bold enough to make those assumptions, and then humble enough to modify them if the data that you're looking at and user experience metrics tell you a different story. So that's something we're always looking at as well. We've tried foundationally to limit the number of input selections people make on platform. So if you give them 20 opportunities to make a selection, how does that hierarchically affect what they're seeing? It might be confusing. So we try very hard to limit it to 4 or 5 at a maximum so that it can be very easy to understand any change that they're making in the platform and how that affects what they're seeing visually. So we are data visualization first. That's where we've invested a lot over the last couple of years. That's what our Horizon platform is all about. It's about seeing the data. We ingest data with lots of zeros after it, but you're not supposed to care about that. You're just supposed to care about, are the results easy to understand and are all the results accurate, right? And so that's where we tried to focus, right? So data visualization. A couple of years ago, and this is our DMOs are our clients. We saw data like this being communicated out to the public and to the stakeholders, to our customers. And this is how they speak, not only in terms of how money is being spent, but of what's important, right? So what's important, jobs are important based on tourism dollars, and how do you increase the length of stay for folks? And these are big, in your face, bold metrics that you take downstream. Bala touched on this earlier. Where is the data, or the visualizations in this case, where are those going to go after they leave your platform? And in many respects, they're going to download the PNG and they're going to put that in a slide and they're going to present to stakeholders. And these big, in your face kind of metrics that are summarized are what allow people to make decisions and start conversations and drill down on certain areas, and ultimately allow them to make investments that generate, hopefully, increased tourism, increased hotel stays, increased vacation rental stays, and increased spend in the market, right? So these are the types of things we try to help generate. We don't even participate in all these that are on the screen, but we do try to put big, in-your-face metrics in front of you so that you can understand, what does the trend look like? What are the dollars associated with? How long are people staying, for example? How much money per person per visit is generated? How does the trend look like over time? Where does a trend stand out, right? Where is there red in this case, or at least in the US example that Paula spoke to? What should I pay attention to where something is decreased, where I didn't expect it to? Whereas something increased, reflecting something that we have done is working, right? Many people like to see things on maps and hover over them and say, oh, well, show me on a map where people are aggregating and spending money, or spending time, or staying in hotels, or staying in vacation rentals, those types of things. So we try to speak to people through big metrics, through textual narrative, through art charts and graphs, through rankings, through maps, because when we did our research, when we completely repositioned our company to focus on data visualization and being able to tell the stories with these data, that's what we heard, right? That's how people want to see things. They want to speak their own language and be told stories that are easy to understand. And ultimately, the most important thing is that stories that are actionable. So some of the natural text summaries that we output right here were just a simple ranking of the top 3, not the top 50. This touches on what Bala mentioned earlier. Where are we drawing people's attention? Well, the biggest mover, the most important thing. Draw attention to the most, the venue with the biggest delta, or the biggest change, right? Who are the people that are staying longer? And so we try to speak in text, in graphs and charts, and in summaries. Some people might, look at our platform and they might prefer to see charts like this or rankings like this. Just tell me what's the highest and what's the lowest, and allow me to see the top 10, top 50, top 100 if I want to. Somebody might prefer a visual like this that says, okay, people that arrive in Denver spend a lot of time at a certain place. Like, these are the amount of people that are going to Red Rocks Amphitheater. This is the same type of data visualized in a different way. And we give them a choice, or in most cases, we attempt to give them a choice or let them pick their own flavor. Again, we don't know what's happening downstream. We don't know how the person viewing it prefers to visualize it. And we don't know how their stakeholders prefer to visualize it. So we try to give them a choice. Some people prefer this, right? So give me a matrix like this so that I can understand it in this way. Other people might prefer a map. Show me where people are coming from. I want it by zip code. I want it by DMA. I want it by state. Let them choose that flavor. And it's to a degree, you attempt to be an ice cream shop with limitations, right? You don't want 500 flavors, but you don't want just one, right? So give it to them in ways that they, in the language that they speak, or the language they might want to talk about. This, more succinct, more basic. Some people prefer to see data like that. Some people just want, give me a file. I will put it into my platform of choice, and I will, become a data wrangler, and I will cut it and slice it however I want. So give them that too, because that is on one hand, it's transparent. On the other hand, we may not have sliced the data or presented the data exactly what they want. So give them that choice. We work hard at putting big, bold KPIs front and center, very top of our platform, so that people can act on this stuff. So this is, similar to one of my first slides where our customers, a DMO, might care about things that matter to them and help them tell stories and justify decisions and make new decisions. It allows us to separate data out into very easy and easy to understand graphs and charts. This one happens to be hotels and vacation rentals on top, and then visiting friends and relatives, which is just another way of saying everybody else in the third. But you can very easily see, most people stay in hotels. This is where vacation rentals come in, and this is how everybody else stays. And let them take things with them, right? And so trust is earned. In this case, you can take this particular chart and you can say, give me the CSV and the data behind it, give it to me in Excel, give me a high resolution PNG so I can put it in my own PowerPoint, give me a PDF. And so we try to give them a choice. How are people going to use this data and these visuals after they leave our platform? Because as Bala touched on, we spend a lot of time working toward making them the hero, our customer the hero, and allowing them to succeed in what they endeavor to do with the data, which is either to, react to something that hasn't gone right, justify something that has, or continue to invest in new ways based on what the data tells them. And again, this is a repeat from a prior slide and what Bala mentioned as well. Give them something that allows them to draw their attention to things that matter. In this case, right, December 2022 doesn't look great. Draw your attention to it. What happened in December 2022? What can we do about it? What can we learn from it? You might not always have causality as the publisher of the data, but you can make the assumptions that your customers downstream are intelligent and that they know what to do. And then know when to break apart data, right? So again, this is a local traveler or somebody that lives in market versus a visitor, somebody that has come from out of town, in this case, likely flown in to Denver International Airport, right? And so you want to understand how to break apart data based on what's important to your customer. So you might behave differently or invest differently or market differently for local people versus people that are flying in. So know how to break apart data in an intelligent way to best tell the story. And then side by sides. Year over year stuff that Bala mentioned with the colors and the gray here, to reiterate that, you can see very clearly a local versus a visitor and the differences in behavior. So again, just how to tell stories with data and break apart data, and then putting them side by side can also be very powerful. So my summary, similar to Bala's, know your audience, know how they want to tell stories to their stakeholders, give them flavors to choose from, keep it clean and easy. Another way of saying clutter is your enemy, to reiterate Bala. Allow the stories that you tell to be obvious, be transparent, because trust is earned, and then continually build and add new features to your platform based on the feedback that you get from whoever your customer is. And we all endeavor to do that. So that's what I have. I'm going to pass this over to Justin, who is going to talk you through an engineering perspective. Justin?
Hey everyone, I'm Justin. I'm on the engineering team here at Arrivalist, and I just wanted to briefly kind of touch on some of the technical aspects of our decision making for visualizations. So here at Arrivalist, we ingest over 10 billion data points daily from our data providers, and on any given day, we analyze over 14 trillion data points. This leads to having petabytes of data available, but the real question is how do you find the signal and noise that solves your client's needs? In that case, we employ powerful clustering, attribution, visitation, and trip models that are unique to Arrivalist that we've been developing over for many years to distill that raw data into something usable that powers our visualizations. Next slide, please, Jeff. Here's some of our guiding design principles, really, is that, our clients have many unique wants, but it boils down to sort of an underlying need. What do I do now with the resources that I have? Our job here when we're designing our visualizations is to hone in on what matters in a visually appealing way by finding a balance between images, words, and numbers without sacrificing visual clarity and simplicity. And as you can see, we've made strides when you can see some of the examples that Jeff and Bala have already shown. We've made investments in new data sources, warehouses, data models, and libraries that allow us to present rich data visualization that is responsive to what our clients care about, and importantly, use in an easy manner. We also strive to minimize how much a user is going to have to really think about what it is they want. It's like you should be able to just access these visualizations and just get the insights that you care about right away. And of course, it turns into a continuous development and iteration. It's a continuous process of improvement in terms of design and usability. But ultimately, our goal is how do we get our clients the data that they need in a way that they understand it the best? And that informs us for how we go about structuring and creating these visualizations and delivering them to you in a performant manner. And that's really all I have to say. I'm gonna pass it to Cree now.
Well, thank you. Thanks, everybody. I know we've run a little bit long here. We're open for some questions for the next couple of minutes. If you have any, promise we weren't trying to avoid the questions. We're just pretty passionate about this and we get into the subject matter. Thanks for the update, Justin. We did have one question come in through the Q&A regarding our control groups. Do our control groups include the exposed users as well? And I want to point out that when we run an analysis, we only look at devices that we know were exposed and devices that we did not see any exposures on. I wish I could say that there was such a thing as a pristine control group. In other words, it's really impossible to say that a device or a person has never seen an ad. All we can control is the devices that we know have seen ads and the devices that we did not record any exposures for. So we are only comparing knowingly exposed devices to devices that we did not record any exposures to. To answer that question directly, we were also asked, were there only 2 incremental visitors from the exposed group? And we wouldn't report that if our total, if we only had 6, a panel of 6. What we're doing there, to Bella's point, is decluttering it, pushing it together. So we likely had thousands of exposed users arriving and thousands, if not tens of thousands of unexposed users arriving. So we were just simplifying for the sake of explanation. Any other questions, comments? Thanks for everybody for the nice words. Getting some nice words in the chat. It's always great to reconnect with our clients, and thank you for the compliments. And yes, this will be recorded, so you can share this with some peers. And it's great to reconnect with all you colleagues. Please don't be shy about reaching out with us. Look out for more Horizon announcements today. We sent out a client email today. We got more fun stuff coming. And thanks to the team for the presentation, and thank you to TTRA for being informed for this exchange. And next time we'll make it half as long. Maybe not twice as informative, but half as long. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, everyone.